Most people think financial freedom starts when income finally gets large enough. I do not think that is true. I think it begins much earlier, and in a much less glamorous place. It begins the moment a person stops letting money drift and starts giving it orders. I have known people with ordinary incomes who became steadily stronger every single year because every dollar that entered their life was told exactly what to do. I have also known people with salaries that would impress almost anyone, and yet by the end of each month they still felt cornered because their money had no real structure. It came in, it disappeared, and then they told themselves that one day, when the paycheck got even bigger, the stress would finally stop. It usually does not stop that way. That is one of the most expensive fantasies in personal finance. The source material you gave me repeats this lesson from several angles. One 6-month plan begins by confronting avoidance and forcing the reader to know the few numbers that actually matter. Another version starts by owning your numbers, saving the first month of essentials, clearing destructive debt, then moving into investing, income growth, and automation. The Fayday version says almost the same thing in a different cadence. Pull up the statements, cut the fat, automate the system, attack bad debt, build your first emergency reserve, start investing, and then keep tightening the structure until the whole financial life becomes intentional instead of reactive. All three pieces are really talking about the same transformation. Money stops being chaos only when it becomes assigned. Fay-file-a-site, fay-turn, fay-file, fay-file-a-site, fay-turn, fay-fay-fay-file-a-site, fay-turn, fay-fill. Fay. That is why if you asked me how I would help an ordinary person transform his finances, I would not start with stock tips. I would not start with real estate dreams. I would not start with side hustles, retirement calculators, or complicated tax maneuvers. I would start with something less exciting and much more powerful. Clarity, then structure, then consistency, and only after that, growth. That is the correct order. A great many people live in a kind of financial fog. They know they are working, they know bills are being paid, they know they are trying, but they do not know with precision what comes in after tax, what goes out over a full year, what is essential, what is discretionary, what is debt service, what is real saving, or what their actual monthly surplus looks like once life takes its turn. Without those answers, there is no true financial strategy. There is only motion. You can feel busy with money and still be blind. That is why the first phase of any real turnaround must be ownership of the numbers. I would want to see every account, every statement, every debt balance, every automatic subscription, every insurance payment, every recurring leak that pretends to be too small to matter. I would not look only at one pretty month. I would look at least the last 3 months, and ideally I would annualize the whole picture in my mind, because a year reveals what a month hides. A year shows you the expensive irregularities, the holidays, the repairs, the renewals, the obligations you like to call surprises, even though life seems to produce them with remarkable regularity. Once the numbers are visible, the first question becomes very simple. After the essentials, after the existing debt obligations, after the life you are already living, what is left? That number matters more than salary alone, because that number is the seed of every future improvement. If there is no surplus, then something must change before wealth can begin. If there is a surplus, even a modest one, then freedom has a point of entry. The 6-month and 3-month source plans both understand this. They ask the reader to separate fixed or essential costs from discretionary spending and debt. That is not bookkeeping for its own sake. It is the first act of strategic thinking. Until you know what your life costs at the most basic level, you do not know what you are trying to protect. And if you do not know what you are trying to protect, then you do not know what your first savings goal should be. Fay-file-a-site, fay-turn. Fay-file, fay-fay-file-a-site, fay-turn, fay-fay. file site fei turn fei fill o. I have always believed that the first truly life-changing money goal is not $1 million. It is the first month of breathing room, 1 month of essential expenses saved, not 1 month of luxury, not 1 month of entertainment, 1 month of your actual foundation, rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, transportation, the things without which ordinary life starts breaking. There is a great psychological shift that happens when a person finally stores 1 month of life outside the next paycheck. Before that, almost every inconvenience feels larger than it should, because there is no cushion between the shock and the panic. After that, the world is still uncertain, but the person begins to feel, perhaps for the first time, that not every problem must be solved with this Friday's wages. That is an extraordinary improvement in the human experience. One of the source plans says directly that building that first month of essential expenses moves a person into a tiny minority of people who have actually begun taking control. Another version focuses first on getting to the first $1,000. The exact amount matters less than the idea. The first reserve is the first time your future is not completely owned by your next pay cycle. Fei fal site fei turn. Fei fal site fei turn fei. Now, I know the objection. That sounds nice, but real life is expensive. Of course it is. Housing is expensive, food is expensive, insurance is expensive. Everything seems to have found a way to become expensive. That is why the second act in a serious reset is not dreaming bigger. It is cutting the fat without lying to yourself. This is where most people prefer abstraction. They say they need to spend less, but they never identify where. They say life is expensive, which is true, but they fail to separate the parts of life that are expensive by necessity from the parts that became expensive by drift, boredom, ego, convenience, or unexamined habit. The Fei Day plan in your materials makes a very good move here. It literally sorts spending categories, largest to smallest, and asks whether each one can be reduced 10 to 30%. That is the correct spirit. Not moral drama, not theatrical self-denial. Just an honest question. Can this cost come down? Fei file site fei turn fei fill fei. That is how intelligent saving begins. Not through vague guilt, through targeted reduction. The rides you called because you were lazy. The shopping that was not really shopping, but mood regulation. The subscriptions nobody uses. The convenience patterns that feel harmless because they are recurring. The insurance you never compared. The plans you never renegotiated. The habits that grew in silence until they looked structural. This is where ordinary people find the money they swore did not exist, not because they were foolish, because friction hit it. And every dollar recovered in this stage serves a very specific purpose. It must not be sent back into lifestyle drift. It must be assigned. That is the difference between temporary frugality and financial transformation. If saved money remains unassigned, it will simply be spent again in a different costume. That is why after the first month of breathing room, the next task is ruthless prioritization. What is poisoning the future fastest? Usually the answer is bad debt. I do not think all debt is equally immoral or equally destructive. Some debt can be connected to useful ownership or long-term earning power, but high-interest consumer debt is another creature entirely. That sort of debt is not helping you build. It is actively taxing your future month after month while pretending to help your present. The source materials converge here too. One 6-month plan tells the reader to rank debt by interest rate and attack the balances above roughly 8%. Another Fei Day plan emphasizes credit cards specifically and even suggests calling the issuer to reduce the rate while accelerating payments. Those are not small tactics. They are direct attacks on a leak that compounds against you. Fei fal site fei turn, fei fal site fei turn, fei fal site fei turn, fei fill hey. If you pay 21% on revolving card debt, you do not have an investing problem yet. You have a fire. Put that out first. A lot of people try to save, invest, and pay down everything all at once. Sometimes that is emotionally satisfying because it feels balanced. Very often it is strategically weak. Destructive debt deserves concentrated force. A person cannot sprint toward freedom while dragging a chain whose cost is mathematically larger than most realistic investment returns. So I would do what the source material implies. List the debts, rate, balance, minimum payment. Then I would choose a method that fits the person. If mathematics is enough motivation, avalanche the highest rate first. If psychology needs quick wins, snowball the smallest balance first. I am not dogmatic about this. I am dogmatic only about one thing. Pick a system and move. Once the worst debt is under control, then the next reserve must rise. 1 month of essentials is powerful. 3 months is stabilizing. 6 months, where needed, begins to change the entire emotional quality of a household. That is why the source plans keep returning to emergency funds. They are not exciting. But excitement is not what you need in this phase. You need resistance. An emergency fund is how a person stops every bad week from becoming a capital event. It is how you stop turning inconvenience into credit card interest. It is how you stop borrowing urgency from the future. Fay file a site, fay turn. Fay file site, fay turn, fay fi. And it matters where that reserve sits. I do not want my emergency fund auditioning to be growth capital. Its job is stability. That means accessible liquid, not so tempting that it leaks into dining out, but not trapped in something volatile either. The source texts rightly point people toward high-yield savings vehicles for this layer. That is exactly right. The emergency fund has one job: be there. Not double, not impress, be there. Fay file a site, fay turn. Fay file a site, fay turn, fay fail a site. Fay turn, fay fill. Hey fee. Now once that first real base exists, a person faces a much more hopeful question. How do I stop relying on labor alone? That is where investing truly begins. I do not think investing is complicated in the way beginners fear. I think it is emotionally difficult in the way most adults underestimate. That is a very different thing. The basic logic is not mysterious. Productive assets, held sensibly and for long enough, have historically outgrown cash. The source material references broad market exposure and long-run equity returns repeatedly. That is fine as a broad teaching frame. The exact averages do not matter here as much as the structure of the argument. If you want money to work while you do not, you must place part of it where time and productive enterprise can compound on your behalf. Fay falicite, fay turn, fay fal, fay falicite, fay turn, fay falicite, fay turn, fay fill, hey, but only long-term money belongs there. That distinction must be defended. The person who invests money needed in 12 months is not brave. He is misassigning labor. The person who uses long-term investing as a substitute for short-term reserves is not efficient. He is fragile. This is why I prefer clear buckets: protection money, debt, killing money, near-term goal money, long-term growth money. Each bucket has a different job. Confuse the jobs, and eventually life forces you into foolish selling or unnecessary borrowing. Respect the jobs, and the whole system becomes calmer. That is what I mean by letting money serve your freedom. Now, a lot of people want to begin investing by looking clever. I would rather begin by looking durable. The 6-month source plans both make an excellent point. Take the employer match if it exists. Free money is free money. A guaranteed immediate return from matching is difficult to beat with cleverness. Too many people step over those dollars because they are distracted by the exciting part of investing. I would take the obvious advantage first. That is how grown men and women should think. Fei falicite fei turn fei fal fei falicite fei turn fei fee. Then I would use the right account if tax advantage structures are available. Then I would keep the implementation boring, broad, low-cost diversified funds, no heroics, no meme stocks, no emotional need to tell a dramatic story about how your portfolio was built. The source texts are very clear on this too. They point people away from stock picking and toward broad market funds. That is sensible advice for almost everyone at the beginning, and for many people forever. Simple is not stupid. Simple is often what survives. Fei felicite fei turn fei feli fei felicite fei turn fei 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 felicite fei turn fei filo hey, and once the structure is right. One more thing matters, more than almost anything else. Automation. I think automation is one of the greatest forms of self-respect in finance. People talk about discipline as if discipline were always a matter of raw willpower. I do not believe that. The most reliable discipline is often the discipline built into the structure before temptation has a chance to speak. The source plans are excellent here. They all eventually land in the same place. Bills should be automatic. Savings should be automatic. Investing should be automatic. Debt payment should be automatic. Because when good financial behavior depends on a fresh act of motivation every week, life eventually wins. Fatigue wins. Emotion wins. Distraction wins. Automation shifts the burden away from the tired mind and into the system itself. Fei falicite fei turn. Fei fal fei falicite fei turn fei fei. Fei falicite fei turn fei fill. That is why I would rather build a money system than a money moods fade. Systems persist. This is also the stage where many people discover something interesting. Once the structure is in place, cutting alone is not enough. There is a limit to expense reduction. There is much less limit to useful growth in earning power. The source materials know this as well. 1 month. 5 stage is devoted entirely to increasing income. The Fei Day reset includes a week specifically for raises, side hustles, and skill building. That is exactly right. At some point, the stronger move is no longer another canceled subscription. It is better labor economics, better skills, better positioning, better value offered to the market. Fei falicite, fei turn, fei fal, fei falicite, fei turn, fei fale fei falicite, fei turn, fei fil. New income must be assigned before it arrives. Otherwise, it just becomes new drift. A raise with no assignment usually becomes inflation of lifestyle. A raise with assignment becomes acceleration of freedom. That is why wealthy people do not simply earn more. They root more. That is the distinction. And if you keep doing this long enough, another quiet but powerful practice becomes possible. Measurement. The Fei Day plan brings this in later with net worth tracking. And I think that is very smart. Income tells you what the month felt like. Net worth tells you whether your life is actually strengthening. If income rises but net worth does not, then something is eating the future. If net worth rises, then some part of your labor is being converted into enduring strength. That is the score that matters. Fei felicite fei turn. Faithful Fei person who tracks net worth calmly is less likely to confuse movement with progress. And a person who reviews spending periodically, as the Fei Day source recommends in its later weeks, is less likely to let old leaks grow back in new clothes. This is another subtle truth about money. Good systems drift if never reviewed. That is why the best financial lives are not built only once. They are tuned, not obsessively, but consistently. Fei felicite, fei turn, fei fill fei. That is where your request matters most. You said use 3 months for the theme and 6 months for the skeleton. I think that is exactly right. Because the 3-month theme is urgency, wake up, own the numbers, stop drifting, reset the machine. And the 6-month skeleton is maturity, first know, then save. Then kill the toxic debt, then build the reserve, then invest, then grow income, then automate, then optimize. That is the full progression. And if I were telling this story as honestly as I could, I would say the real transformation is not from broke to rich in 90 days or 6 months. The real transformation is from reactive to intentional. That is the shift that changes everything. Once money becomes intentional, even a modest income starts behaving differently. Once money becomes intentional, a future appears. Once money becomes intentional, the same paycheck that used to vanish now starts producing reserve, then investing, then optionality, then confidence. That is how real wealth begins, quietly, without the drama people expect, without the fantasy that one perfect move changes everything. It begins when money is no longer allowed to behave like an untrained crowd. It begins when each dollar is given a place, a purpose, and a time horizon. It begins when the system stops needing you to be emotionally perfect in order to work. It begins when the next raise is routed before it is spent. It begins when the emergency fund exists before the emergency. It begins when debt is attacked by plan instead of by guilt. It begins when investing is boring enough to be repeated. It begins when you start measuring the right things. And if you do that long enough, then something surprising happens. You stop feeling like money is constantly happening to you. You begin to feel that money is finally working for you. That is the whole game. Not more noise, not more jargon, not more financial theater, more order, more purpose, more assigned dollars, more freedom. That is the kind of wealth worth building.